Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francescagraham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. Welcome back, Star Chamber listeners, to another great episode of the Star Chamber.
All right.
Dun, dun, dun. And today we are distinctly honored to have on as a guest a current client of the Walk the Talk Foundation. Our client, his name is Dr. Right? Dr. Daniel Clark?
No, it's just Daniel Clark. The doctor comes from, it's my middle initial is from Robert, Daniel Robert Clark. So my apologies. I meant to say that. I apologize.
Yeah, no, I should have asked. I didn't put two and two together as well. I was like, Dr. Clark. Right.
Yeah, I was like, Dr. Clark, okay.
Call sign.
Right, Dr. Clark, there you go. All right, so now I'm just going to say it. Daniel D.R. Clark.
D.R. Clark. Call sign doctor.
Exactly. So he is a proud husband, a devoted father, and dedicated Army civilian who has spent over 15 years serving this nation with integrity, purpose, and resilience. His grandfather served over 20 years in the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War. His father followed in his footsteps, retiring from the Army after more than 2 decades of distinguished service. And his mother served also in the Department of the Army as a Army civilian for over 20 years in financial management and accounting. And all credit goes to Doctor. We're just going to call you Doctor the rest of the show, Dan. All credit goes to the doctor, because there in his bio, he gave all the leadership lessons credit to his mom. So we all love our moms on this show.
Very nice.
Yes.
After graduating from Colorado State University, he began a service in the federal civilian service career as an Installation and Management Command financial management trainee at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Airborne. From there, he steadily grew into positions of increasing responsibility, overseeing multi-million-dollar budgets, leading high-performing financial teams, and managing all aspects of Army financial operations at major installations, including Aberdeen Proving Ground, Fort Carson, and U.S. Army Garrison Stuttgart. His biography is not only about a career, it's about a calling. He has been shaped by the belief that service, honor, and accountability must guide everything that we do, especially within the institutions meant to protect and serve the people. When these systems fail to uphold these values, whether through negligence, retaliation, or injustice, it is not just a personal failure. It is a systemic one that demands exposure and change. And as you know, Dan, we here at Walk the Talk Foundation could not agree more. So before we turn it over to you to kind of expand a little bit on your bio and tell us a little bit about your story, about what brought you to the foundation, I'd like to read a quick disclaimer. The opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the United States Army or any other government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization or federal civilian, for all you federal civilian people out there. And what do we say, Ryan?
Suck it, Poindexter.
Oh, there's a harmony. There's a harmony.
We mixed it up. That was good. That was totally off the cuff.
I love that. All right, so Dr. Dad.
Thank you,
We're
guys.
just going to call you that. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and welcome to the show.
First off, Ryan and Francesca, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for taking my case and just being such good advocates to a world that, I truly didn't know existed within the federal government. As you mentioned, my name is Daniel Clark. I've been working with the federal government for over 15 years. I came in out of college. I started into a management training program where I understood all the different positions of the finance office there at Fort Bragg, building relationships, just kind of learning how to do everything, become that leader within the system that I was working. And through that, just kind of grew from there, as you had mentioned, and was able to progress my career to financial management officer, the chief of the financial management office, where I was, responsible for not only myself, but now I was responsible for staff members, leading, building teams, and making information flow to garrison commanders to make decisions based off of. So that's a little bit about my career. What brought me to the foundation, honestly, was just a blessing. The situation that I'm involved in, I was involved. Allegations of wrongdoing were falsely made against me. And after that allegation, what I went through at my organization, U.S. Army South, which I currently am employed there, I felt immediately wasn't right. Due to me being that leader within the government for those 15 years, I learned how to manage people. I learned the processes and the systems that we should be following because I was in that financial realm. So dealing with finance, you have a lot of regulations and policies, and anything you put your name to can end up in jail. So I was always very keen on the regulations.
Okay, so Dan, before we get too deep into the weeds, so first of all, I want to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for trusting the foundation with your case. And really, hats off to you for having the courage and the gumption to come on the show. We're coming up on, it'll be year 4 here in February of the foundation. We've been working with upwards of almost 500 people, if you round up. It's like 480 right now. And a lot of people feel like their story should be told, but a relative few, for a myriad of reasons, don't want to assume the risk of going public with their story, and understandably so, for a slew of reasons which we're all familiar with. But then there are those few like yourself who are like, what's right is right, and what needs to be told, and you're on the show. So thank you first and foremost for doing that. So let's talk about, before we get into the the specifics, nitty gritty of what happened to you, how did you come across the foundation? How did our two fates collide?
So I was lucky enough to come across the foundation through just telling my story through friends, family, the community. My father was in the Army for over 20 years. He was an Army Ranger. Here in San Antonio, there's a vast network of retired Army Rangers and people that he's friends with. And so I was blessed to have shared my story with retired Lieutenant Colonel Chris Eldridge, who has been listening to this from day one and just a good family friend of ours. And I was there sharing the story with him one day, giving him an update. And he said, I really want you to look up something and I'm going to send it to you. And so he later texted me the podcast that you guys had done, the Star Chamber. And then he had also sent me Walk the Talk Foundation, and he had sent me Francesca's information. I'm not sure if the two knew each other or if they just maybe knew each other in passing, but either way, I got the information. I started listening to the podcast, and I was just shocked at how connected my case was to what you guys represented. And to be honest, I'd fought this case myself for 10 months. So I wasn't able to have an attorney, or, I was just fighting myself. And so I needed somebody like you guys. I needed an advocate. I wasn't able to get an attorney until an adverse action came against me, and then I could retain an attorney. And like I said, that was 10 months in. And then shortly thereafter, I'd updated Chris Eldridge, who led me to Francesca. I emailed her and immediately got an email back. And I listened to you guys' podcast, and I wanted to do exactly what you said, dump all my files and send all my information and let's get this going right here and there.
Was that the relevance of evidence? That's my favorite podcast. The relevance of evidence. I have everything.
I was like, well, instead of sending the whole box of stuff here, I'm just going to kind of summarize what I can. And
that's awesome.
We appreciated that.
Yeah. And so I got an immediate email back from Francesca, and it was rejuvenating, to say the least, that I have connected with people in an organization that understands truly what this other world out there exists and what it's about. And so I just kept connecting, emailing and sending information, and Cheska got me in line with Miss Gina Cotton, and she's been wonderful to work with. From the moment I spoke with her, I just sent her my information. I dumped the box of files on her. So she got the 20 gigabytes of information.
Which I know she appreciated. And as a former IG, I know she appreciated even more.
Well, and one thing I can tell you guys, from working this for 10 months, I really am fighting from day one. And just like you guys had just spoke about, you got to be a shark out there. You can't stop moving. And so from day one, I knew this wasn't right. I had shown up to kind of tell what had happened. And I had immediately seen things not happening right to me. So I immediately started documenting. I immediately started making note of things. And so that's kind of how I came across the organization. And it was a blessing, to say the least. And I'm very thankful. And I just look forward to the continued partnership on how we can assist with, the change that is very much needed.
Awesome.
And I think one thing you said that I just want to foot stomp, even though, God, I can't believe I said that, Ryan. Can you believe that? For those of you who can't see, because it's audio, Ryan just hung his head in shame that I just used that anachronism. So gross. So something I want to highlight, not foot stomp, highlight is what you said up front. So you, as a complainant, you were 10 months on your own. And that's something that we at Walk the Talk Foundation think is just an utter travesty, that a person is told, we're told over and over and over again as part of our narrative, if you see something, say something. And then once you say something, all of a sudden you have the entire weight of the institution, including maybe even the Department of Justice and all their high-paid lawyers, the entire weight of the institution coming after you. And you have no idea what's going on in your world. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible. Okay, so now you're with Walk the Talk Foundation. We're happy to have you. And we're also, I wanted to just bring this forward again. I said it very briefly up front that you are an Army civilian. And we do at Walk the Talk Foundation, we do help federal civilians. And you are also the first federal civilian that we've had on this podcast, which is really fantastic. So
all right.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about just broadly, because we know your case is still ongoing. So unless if you feel comfortable, I don't need to name names. You don't need to give too many specifics, but just broadly tell us what happened and kind of what happened on the day that triggered an incident, as it were, broadly. You don't need to get into the details again. Triggered an incident, and then how did your command respond, which then turned you into this 10-month long complainant followed by subject, where you could actually retain counsel.
Yeah, so this was about June 6th of 2024, so 14 months ago. There was a organizational day with U.S. Army South. It was an offsite, so it was a place of business for the military who could dress down in civilian clothes, and civilians could come. It was the summertime. I had my kiddos teleworking that day, and then we went to the org day. Org day was just a fun day with coworkers, families, just kind of having a morale boosting time together, games, fun. So we get there pretty early, 9:45. The commanding general starts speaking at 10. My kiddos are playing in the back. And there was another group of kids there. And one of the kids in particular I noticed was playing a little rough. And so, I tried to separate my kids by calling them over and having them play in a different area of the facility. And the aggression kind of continued with this child. So I had walked over and asked the child, like, we don't do that kind of stuff here. You don't get physical with people and put hands on other kids. And I asked to speak to his mom and dad, and he got a little bit disrespectful. Like, I don't have a mom and dad, stupid. And so then I told the young child, you're being disrespectful to adults. So here nor there, the child left the play area and went back to a table, and I kind of from afar was watching my children continue to play in the facility, and then kind of watched this child where he went and sat down and noticed that he was around adults but didn't take to any which one of them. So this was about 10:15 at this time in the morning. So 15 minutes into the event, we had commanding general always opens our organizational days with an update to the team, what the past is, what the right now is, and what the future looks like. And so we were all kind of going through that. We were going through a big change of command. So our one commanding general was leaving and a new change of command was coming in. So they're giving updates on that information. And so about 25 minutes later from this incident, I come across one of these captains that I work for in the G8. I work in the G8 of Army South, where I work on finance and accounting, reconciling old accounts. And so several of my coworkers were sitting at a table that was designated for the G8 staff. And so he had said, hey, we have a table up front if you want to come sit down with us and your family. So I joined them. So from 10:20 in the morning until about noon, I sitting with my coworkers, a captain, a sergeant, the sergeant's wife. She was holding their infant child. His brother was there, another child. My three kids were there. I have a daughter, my son, and then we had brought another little friend with us. And so as we're sitting at the table, of course, we're telling our story about what just had happened and transpired. My kids are sharing their information with the table. And so I start to see this child, kind of point him out where he's at, and he's looking at us. And so we come across the mother and have an engagement with her and the child. And during that conversation, the child had struck my child again. And I had asked, is that behavior acceptable? Your child is being aggressive. Now he's doing it again. And the kid started kind of really screaming and just lost control and started striking his mother. And I asked the lady and this was all in front of my coworkers, in front of my children. And she kind of justified that behavior by the kid having severe ADD, no father at home helping her, and that she couldn't control the child. And it kind of just ended by her embarrassingly grabbing the child and kind of just walking back to her table with the child. And so as you can imagine, there was greater conversation after this occurrence had just happened at the G8 table. So that's a little bit about the incident. And then the 12 o'clock time frame, I got up from the table. We had lunch together. We were playing games together at the table. At 12 o'clock, I stepped outside just to check on my kiddos. I engaged with some of my other leadership out there. I got a text message, particularly from the captain that I work with. And a little bit about that captain, I went to high school with this captain. I graduated in 2001. He graduated in 2003. And we had known mutual friends, and we'd worked together at Army South. He had been stationed there for a bit over a year now. Kind of put the two and two together. We went to the same high school, knew a lot of the same people. So we built a relationship on that prior to this event ever even happening. So I wanted to kind of point that out from where we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But I got a text message from the captain that said, are you still at the event? As I'm standing outside. And he sends another text message shortly thereafter at about 12:13 and says, if you're still here, come back to the table. So I walked back inside and I went back to the G8 table where we were previously sitting. And he had told me that mother had kind of cornered him and, asked him direct, like, what's my rank? Where do I work? And what's my name? And so he said he gave her the information, and I saw that the mother was still standing at her table. So I walked back over there and I told her the information that she was looking, what my name was, where I worked, and who my supervisor was. And I reminded her at that time what our previous engagement was and what her son had done. And she was surrounded by what I later came to find out was her lieutenant colonel supervisor, a sergeant major of her office, and other leadership and other staff that worked in the office there. So she was surrounded by several people. And so we had this engagement. And after that engagement, my family and I left the facility at about approximately 1 or 1:30. And my sole intention that day was to go in on Monday morning and have the conversation with my supervisor. And a little bit about my supervisor. He and I worked together previously in Germany for 4 years. He was on the resource management side, working at the highest level of the finance for the garrison commander, and I was working on the non-appropriated side for MCOM at the highest level of the finance, working for the garrison commander. So he and I had a great working relationship there in Stuttgart, Germany. His family knew my family. Our wives were in like a breakfast club together. So we spent time outside of just work together. And so he knew who I was. And as he left Germany, he told me that he was going to Army South and that he'd be the chief of the office there. And I told him if there was ever any opportunity for me to come and work with him due to our previous past of working with one another, it'd be great to join. And so I got that opportunity. And so my point there is that I've known and worked with my supervisor at this point for over 8 years. And you know somebody by 8 years. We've traveled TDY together. We've been to work conferences together. We've been running together outside of work. We've been out to dinner together. We've hung out outside of work. He knew who I was. And so I was supposed to telework on June the 10th. It was a Monday. And when I showed up to work, I had canceled my appointment that morning and instead drove into the office due to the situation that occurred on Friday. Just wanted to talk to my boss, just like I would on anything. If it was a penny missing, if it was wrong disbursement, any kind of correction we need to make, I'd bring it to his and we'd have that conversation. I did that same thing on Monday. I showed up Monday, popped in, said good morning, and immediately got this look of like, was shocked that I was there. He quickly looked at me and asked me, did something happen at org day? And I said, well, yes, something did happen at org day, and that's why I'm here to talk to you. Immediately picked up the phone and called to the security G2 office, which is our clearance folks. They give I have a secret clearance. Most of the folks in office do. And so called the investigators upstairs and quickly hung up the phone and told me that he was escorting me upstairs to security. And so he escorted me through the G8 office. And immediately at that point, I was like, this is not, something that I'm used to with my supervisor. So we go to the G2 security office and I'm interrogated. They asked me what happened. And I said, well, why am I here? And they said, well, we don't know anything. Nothing's been reported to us. And I said, well, yes.
Except you're being interrogated. So obviously they know something.
Exactly. And so,
and of course they didn't advise you to your right to counsel or anything, I'm sure.
No,
because they know nothing. They know nothing. Therefore, you don't need counsel, obviously. Okay, I interrupted. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We just want to chat.
Just a quick chat after we escort you in front of your entire office, but no bigs.
Let's talk.
So I went up there and I told the same story that I just told you guys. I told them that, this is this child and this mother, we had an interaction and this is what happened. And I was looking for accountability. I asked them for their help to locate the mother and be able to assist and just sitting down and maybe having a conversation about what the heck transpired at the org day with all of this, right? I told him that my coworkers were witnesses to this. And soon thereafter, again, I just continued asking for help, told my story, asking why I was there, not being told anything. My supervisor makes the recommendation that I be put on telework status indefinitely. And I was kind of set back by that because they were telling me they didn't know anything. I was being interrogated. I just told them what had happened. I'd asked them for help, and now I'm being sent home. And literally, I was escorted back downstairs, and I was told to leave Building 1000. I collected my computer, my backpack, put my computer in my backpack, and I just arrived to the office, been interrogated, and now I'm back packing up my backpack and I'm leaving. And now I'm back home doing a telework for that Monday morning. And I continuously ask.
You're already guilty is basically, you're already guilty. And probably I'm guessing that they planned to do all the paperwork where you were on telework on Monday and then you surprised them when you showed up.
Well, and the funny thing is that I believe that's true.
We've already tried you.
Yeah, I mean, why are you here? There. Don't you know you're already guilty?
Yeah.
Well, later in the investigation, and once I did get the final 15-6 investigation, I noticed immediately that, yeah, that's what happened. On Friday, I had been labeled by stakeholders within the command that I was, being faced with a felony of child assault and racial epithet. So that reporting went directly to not the police, not, anybody other than the EO director of Army South. She was called. She wasn't at the event. She drove 40 minutes out to the event and met up with the highest level civilian, the former Major General, who's now the Deputy Chief of Staff of Army South. She engaged with him. I later found out that they both engaged with the owner of the facility. He made them both aware that he wasn't aware of anything occurring on his property, that we're at a multi-million-dollar facility with cameras, security guards. The staff was working the event. There was working food. So there was probably 600 to 800 people at the event, plus workers of the event. And so, yeah,
You were sent home on telework, you grab your computer, you're already guilty and you have no idea what's going on.
right.
Now you're learning after the fact how it all transpired behind the scenes to try you and find you guilty.
Right. And so I'm asking my boss each day, what's going on? What's going on? And on June the 13th, he had called me and let me know. And I still hadn't been told anything, had no inclination that any alleged allegations of wrongdoing were made against me. I was told nothing other than I could come back to work now on Friday, June the 14th, which was, 3 or 4 days later after I'd been banned from the office, told to go home and telework. Showed up to work that Friday and I kept asking, what's going on? Who can I talk to that's in charge of something? My boss told me the famous line, and I've heard you guys use it before, and it's in an email that he had produced. Trust the process. I've been told by the attorneys to tell you to just trust the process.
Perfect.
So he's talking to the attorneys, and you still didn't even know what you're accused of.
I didn't find out what I was accused of fully until I was read the 15-6 investigation report. It was the battalion commander who was the appointing officer. I wasn't read what I was actually being charged of or told what I was being charged of until she read me the findings on, I think it was middle of July. So, and the investigation was it was done in 19 days. And
which in the scope of investigations is like breakneck speed, by the way. Just as a
right, because you were guilty already, so they knew that.
Yeah, I was like, let's get the administrative stuff done here.
Yep, that Friday.
And this is coming from people who we're working with, whose investigations go for months and if not years. But sorry, continue.
Well, that Friday, I kept just asking who's in charge of this thing. Who can I speak with? Why am I being treated this way? And I was told to trust the process. At about 2 p.m. approximate, I was called into my supervisor's office. I was shown a form, and it was just on a piece of paper, like an MFR document, and it was a no contact order. And so now on this Friday, June the 14th, I was being told that I was not to have no contact with, and my supervisor told me, because I'd been asking who the mother was, he goes, and now you'll know who the mother is because her name's in the no contact order. And so I'm issued this no contact order, and I asked my supervisor, I said, did the mother get one of these? And he states to me that he doesn't know, that he would write it down and he would ask the attorneys. And so I was never getting an answer on that. And I put in to leave that afternoon once I got that, because I just knew there was something wrong. I mean, I wasn't being told anything. I'd worked for a supervisor that I knew very well for 8 years. I knew what our relationship was. I knew how we interacted, and that wasn't what I was seeing at this moment. This guy was turned into a robot. He was being told to do things, and he was just doing them arbitrarily, and I kept questioning them. So,
and kind of, getting to the point about telling your side of the story, Dan. So during the interrogation where you had no rights, were they asking you about the events of that day? And what did the questions center about? And I assume, and like you said, you just recounted the story as you recounted it for us, correct? Did you get any notion that it was like that your side of the story was being taken into account, or there was already a narrative that they had that they were trying to debunk your side of the story? Tell me about the questioning there.
I didn't understand anything that was going on, to be honest with you. What I was trying to do was just question anybody that I could talk to about what was going on. I wasn't told what I was being accused of. I wasn't, I kept telling my side of the story. I'd sit with my boss. There's writing about it that I would come in. I gave my statement to them. It's what it was. I had the victim attitude. My child was, mistreated, and I tried to have the conversation with the mother about it, and then have the conversation at work. And then this is the way that I'm being treated. This was from June the 7th, the day of the event, that afternoon, until about when the formal investigation was signed to the IO on June the 18th. During that June 7th period through that June 17th, I'll just say, there was a lot of stuff that was not going on right there that I kept calling out. And I don't think the command liked that. I wasn't being told anything. I was working. The IO was appointed on June the 18th. I think I was informed by him or a meeting with the battalion commander to let me know that she had appointed somebody, because I kept asking what was going on. And my boss finally told me that he was setting up a meeting with the battalion commander, and then that he would put me on her calendar. So I met with her, and she told me at that point that I was under a formal and 15-6 investigation. She kept it she didn't indicate to me what it was about. She didn't state in there what it was about. I mean, I got the appointment letter. Nothing was given to me. She just verbally kind of told me. And so at that point, I just kept collecting the information, document it, writing it. And anytime I'd have a conversation with my supervisor, I would email him, or I'd go back and I would document it. I'd keep everything in writing. So as I'm under the formal investigation now, I am now contacted by the IO, and he was a GS-14 civilian from the G6 office. He was the appointment investigating officer, sorry. And so he had emailed me letting me know that he was going to be doing an investigation and that he would be getting to me and taking my story at a later date. And then told me at that time not to talk to anybody, that, I was to keep everything to myself and not have a conversation with anybody. And as you can imagine, there's people in the office, obviously, that were at that table that day that knew what happened, that kept coming up to me and having those conversations. Other people through the grapevine had found out.
Saw you escorted out of the office
Saw me escorted out of the office.
Then by the security people.
Didn't see me there at the office, then see me there at the office.
Right. But don't say anything. It's okay.
Don't say anything. I'm not allowed to talk about anything. And so, as you can imagine, I help everybody at the office. So now I'm just sitting in this little corner of my office. People that typically would come by my office or my desk to say good morning aren't. I'm kind of just this guy in the corner now. Stay away from Dan. You're guilt by association.
Yeah, because nobody wants to stink on them.
Yep. Right. So this is where the captain story comes in, where I knew Captain, and we had a prior relationship to this. And so now he was even kind of coming around and walking on eggshells to even have conversations with me. And it's like, we all had a clear conversation at the event on what happened and what just transpired, and, the craziness and how we were set back, what could have been provided to the mother for helping her child in that situation, and just all kinds of different things we had talked about that would normally be talked about in an environment like that when you see something like that. So it was just, I think about July 10th, I was called into my boss's office, or maybe I left that day. I think I left July the 10th, but as I left, I got a call from my boss to call him back. So when I got home, I called him back. I was teleworking that afternoon. And he told me that it had been called down that I was being banned from the office. So this was now my second imposed building ban on July the 10th. It was being brought down. It was brought to the G8 director and then down to my supervisor to let me know that now I was being banned. And on both bannings, I never received anything in writing as far as to why I was being banned, what the terms were of the banning, when I would be able to come back, what I would have to meet, what was being alleged against me for being banned. I received absolutely nothing. I believe they were just arbitrarily given to me.
And just for my own curiosity, as a federal civilian, don't you have a little bit more rights in that regard than the military? And what I mean by aren't they required to tell you what your duties and responsibilities are on telework, how long this should last, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so we do have a telework agreement within the office, and you're correct. Anything that's done within the military organization that sets up how we're going to do things is mapped out. There's a process. There's who's going to bring it to who to approve it. There's approving authorities. There's people that have to review it at the second and third order level.
Right. So and none of that was being done.
None of that was being done. These were just decisions were being made against me from the deputy chief of staff, the highest level civilian, from day one. June 7th, he had his hand in on this. It was reported back to command that I was being charged with a felony. From there, that was reported to my boss that I was being charged with a felony. And then from there, it just pursued. And so Jimmy had complete control of this thing. He's the one who came to my boss. He told my boss to go get advised by the EO director who was there that day with him. to go to the JAG attorney for Army South, and there's another who's another attorney for Army South. He was to go engage with them as to how to handle the situation with Dan. And so that's what my boss did. And so that's why I didn't get the fair shot when I came in on June the 10th with my supervisor, because he's already been ordered by the command on what to do and who to go seek advisement from.
And to be clear, there was never a felony charge, correct?
No, sir.
This was just a rumor that they based your disciplinary action off, but no one ever vetted the fact that there really never existed any charges, correct?
That's correct. And to this day, 14 months later, there was a police report, Ryan, but I've never been charged. I've never went down and spoke to the police. The only thing that I did was I was advised by counsel, because I did get a criminal attorney, just in the event that something were to happen and come my way, I'd be ready to go for that, was to go down and file what happened at the workday. And so that's what I did. I went down and I filed a police report. But in Texas, there's not much that can be done for kids that are under the age of 10. And so this child was 8. Again, it's not about that. It's about kind of what happened at the workplace. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that kind of stuff, but yeah, I've never been charged. I've never been spoken to by the police. In fact, I think I've always wondered myself. I saw within the M15-6 investigation documents that Army South was working with the detective that arrived that afternoon, because the police were called late that afternoon after my family and I had departed on June the 7th. They were called at about 2:30 in the afternoon is what the police report says. So the incident transpired at 10:15 in the morning, and now the police were being called out at 2:30 in the afternoon once, EO director and deputy chief of staff were on the scene. And so
let's fast forward a little bit, because when we were doing our pre-show discussion, you had mentioned that the investigation, so the Army 15-6 investigation against you was unsubstantiated, that you did not commit a quote unquote felony assault, nor did you commit quote unquote the EO matters. We don't need to discuss those specifically because I know that's ongoing. So that was unsubstantiated against you, or the investigation's unsubstantiated. And yet 18 months later, you are still being punished. Walk us through that a little bit.
So the 15-6 investigation completed with the findings. And as I mentioned, that's the first time I had been given the full array of what I was being alleged with. And so as I'm being told this stuff, I'm asking immediately, who can I appeal with? Who do I need to talk to on this information? When do I get that document? I started asking all the questions on how can I challenge what's being gone on? I know what happened, and what you're telling me happened is not what happened. And so I submitted my first appeal. And within my appeal, I clearly pointed out that there were severe due process violations. Number one, when the parallel investigations were being ran, the informal from June the 7th to about June the 17th under Wells' directive to my direct supervisor to investigate Dan, to the June 18th appointment for the 15-6.
All right, you've been given the results of the investigations unsubstantiated. Now you're rebutting it. It's basically saying, look, you circumvented due process. Despite being unsubstantiated, you violated a slew of rights in that lack of due process. Now let's talk about restitution, I'm guessing, correct?
Yeah, so I listed out to them the due process. I showed them that there were severe witnesses that statements weren't taken. The statements that were taken were on to include my 2 key eyewitnesses that were there that day that I brought that morning of June the 10th. They never were able to produce a sworn statement as to what they saw and witnessed. My supervisor wrote that MFR on their behalf, and what I find odd that day, my supervisor wrote 2 MFRs. He wrote an MFR for the captain and the sergeant, and he wrote it in a way that he writes it as if he were them. We were sitting at the table with, we saw this and we did this and we. But then he does another MFR for the location owner, asking him questions during his investigation time on I believe it was June the 11th. And in that MFR, he writes it as a question and kind of answer. He tells you what he asks the guy, the owner, and the owner responds this. And so there was a lot of that through the investigation that I pointed out was the statements that they did collect were individuals that worked directly for the mother or the major that was involved. I later found out that she was a major Army National Guard member working at Army South, because up until then I had never even known who she was, never saw her. I didn't know who she was. And so I found out she was in the military because we weren't in military clothes that day. And just I don't know, the level of...
So the the investigating officer, from what you saw, only interviewed people that were potentially friendly or allies of the alleged victim and not people that were potentially friendly or even witnesses of you.
Correct.
That's kind of what you're trying to say, I think.
Yeah, and there was about 17 to 18 of those witnesses, to include my own children who were there. I mean, my children are they're 10 and 13, and then we had another 12 or 13-year-old with us at the time as well. And these children are very mature for their age, and they understand what happened that day, and they saw what happened, and they know what happened, and those children were never asked. As I was going through the appeal process, I was denied my first appeal by the Chief of Staff of Army South. And once that was denied, I scheduled an open door meeting with him.
And what exactly are you appealing? So you've been found innocent. What are you appealing?
And so that was the whole thing. I was dealing with the EO office, and they said, "Well, what do you want to appeal, Mr. Clark? You can't appeal the findings. You can only appeal the process." So it was never about the findings that I was appealing. It was about the process that they failed to follow. I mean, there's the regulations, there's 15.6 regulations that state how we need to do things in the times of an investigation. There's the AR 600-20 that states down to if somebody gives you false information. But more importantly, it tells you how you treat the alleged and the perpetrator, or the alleged and the accuser. You can't treat them any differently. You know, I'd shown up to Army South, to my previous jobs, every day, understanding that that's how we're treated. We come to work and we're all treated the same.
I get you. Okay, so you're basically now a complainant. So you've been turned from subject of this sham of investigation, to essentially complainant, because you're alleging all these investigative missteps which occurred, which they did, and now you're going to the institution who carried out this kangaroo court of an investigation on you, looking for restitution for all the due process violations. And of course, we know what the answer from them is going to be, right? It's like everything was on the up and up. You have no case, because they play the role of judge, jury, executioner, right?
Well, it's exactly like you just said. They denied it because the findings were unsubstantiated. And so I found that...
Right, yeah. So you must have gotten your due process because you're innocent.
Well,
right?
I found it odd too, because the EO office is telling me if I want to appeal, I have to appeal by this date, and I can't appeal the findings. I can only appeal the process. And if there was failures in the process, which I did, but now I'm being told that my appeal is being denied because it was unsubstantiated, which is the findings.
Perfect.
So
I think there's a book about that. There's a number there. Okay, so now, so are you still off? Are you still teleworking at this point? Like, let's fast forward on the timeline now that your request from the captors to address your conditions have been denied. You're still not in the office. You've still been pariahed out.
I'm still teleworking at this time. And so then as I'm denied my first appeal, I work my second appeal. And as I'm doing that, I'm setting up open door meetings with Chief of Staff, the Colonel. And then prior to me submitting my second and final appeal, I set up a meeting with our 2-star commanding general. Each of those meetings, I bring myself, my 2 kids in there, and I tell them that they got these things wrong. I've pointed it out to you guys. They're not, there's glaring contradictions here. You guys didn't reconcile the statements that are within the investigation. There's glaring, he said this on this day and she said this on that day that contradict one another, and I would meet with these folks, I would leave, and then I would go and I would file follow up with them. I'd send them an email recapping what our conversation was. And then I submitted my second and final appeal to Major General. That one was denied as well, basically saying that they did follow the 15-6 investigation regulations. So now my appeal processes are up. And during this time, I've submitted reasonable accommodations. I submitted a reasonable accommodation for telework that was completely ignored. I didn't get that back, a response back on that. And then I also submitted another reasonable accommodation for more telework. That one ended up being denied. I was requested to come back to not building 1000 Army South. I was ordered to come back to a different building right behind Army South, building 1026, which is
because you're still guilty.
Because I'm still guilty. And so I've asked them in this reasonable accommodation, it was denied my telework, but that I needed to have an on-post presence. And so they were going to just stash me over in this building that's affiliated with US Southcom, who is affiliated with Army South. So the people that have access that I was asking for protections from in Army South also had access to building 1026. The parking lots were connected. There were facilities such as the gym, the barber, the bathrooms, water fountain, they were all connected to these same places. And so there was no safety there. So I ended up writing, during this time, I'm going to the doctor. My health is deteriorating. My mental health is deteriorating.
I was actually just now going to ask that question almost as a sidebar, but not a sidebar at all, given the statistics that we know that for military personnel, I don't know the statistics for federal civilians, but for military personnel, that the DoD, Department of Defense themselves put out in their last reported study that of all active duty suicides that occurred within that measuring period, 29% of those service members were currently undergoing some sort of legal or administrative process. And you're describing exactly the scenario, right? Like you're voted off the island. I'm quite certain no one wants to talk to you. Your chain of command is only giving you these mobile roboto responses, whether you knew them for 2 years or 8 years. They're just saying, trust the process. I'll talk to the lawyers. You go off to your house and sit there by yourself after your name's being dragged in the mud and you're being escorted out by security officers, right? And then even after the investigation against you is unsubstantiated, which you don't even know what it's about till you get the investigation, you're still voted off the island and stuck in a separate building.
And to top that off, I have no doubt that the leaders involved in this have at some point gotten up in a public forum and espoused the importance of suicide prevention,
taking care of people,
mental health resiliency, taking care of your people, all while they happily let you rot in your own purgatory going through this star chamber of a process.
They've got posters hung all around the office, suicide prevention, and they promote it. And yes, exactly. It's a facade. They want everything to be looking good until it internally on them, they don't do the right things.
And so now, kind of, again, fast forwarding just a little bit, now the situation you're in now, just to catch up to speed, what the foundation is helping you with is we are helping you with this ongoing appeal, not really appeal, but really pointing out all of the problems with the investigation itself, with how you were treated, guilty even if proven innocent. We did a paper about that a while ago.
That's a new one.
Yeah. Guilty even if proven innocent. And so that's really what we're helping you out with now, right? Or is there something else going on there in the mix? I think there is. I'm kind of teeing it up for you.
Yeah, so I got through my second appeal. It was denied, and I was required to come back to work. And where I was required to come back to work didn't provide any safety. I've been seeing a therapist and my medical doctor regularly, just due to mental health issues that I was facing and then medical issues that I was facing. And so I was ordered to come back to work, and I had written them that, I needed to go on extended leave. And so over the 15 years of my career, I didn't ever take much sick leave. So I had an accumulation of over 1,100 sick hours. And then my annual leave was accumulated up to over 200 hours. And so I had approximately 1,300 hours of leave. And so I wrote an extended leave, and I told them in there that, again, reminding everybody to include those senior leaders who I did send this extended leave to, that they had gotten it wrong, that these are all the violations, just kind of rehashing the 15-6 appeals that I had submitted. And so then I went on leave. And during leave, again, I was doing all of this on my own. There was no personnel actions against me, no adverse actions against me. So I would contact counsels and try to seek, get advice. And it was basically a he said, she said at that point. And so I decided that I was going to file a EEO complaint. And so I pursued that through the garrison. I went to the garrison office and I filed an EEO complaint. And so I have a current EEOC complaint filed, a formal complaint filed right now that's ongoing. That was in January of 25. I filed that. In February of 25, a month later, I filed an Inspector General complaint, and I did that through U.S. Army Southcom, the command over Army South. And that was an interesting process in itself, because that was then I sent it to them because of the conflict of interest with who I was filing it against. I was submitting it to Army South. It was going to be against the Major General and his team. And this guy works for him.
Army South, of course. Yeah.
And so then Southcom sends it to Army South. And then I get an email from Army South setting up a conversation. And, each time, of course, you talk to these people, they don't remember what you talked to them about the last time. So you got to rehash everything all out again. So I started my IG complaint, and they ended up just dismissing that. I submitted everything that I had submitted in my appeal, pointed out the glaring procedural violations, the due process violations, the misuse of authority, the abuse of authority and power. I pointed out everything. And I spoke to these folks at length about it. And it ended up being dismissed. And they told me that those aren't items that the IG handles. And so right now I am working with the foundation, Ms. Gina Cotton, on refiling the IG complaint, because there's administrative avenues that you have to exhaust here. And so that's what I'm really going through right now, is the exhausting of all of these administrative options that are there as I continue to just building the foundation of what happened. And so right now we're re-engaging on filing another IG complaint, Inspector General complaint, and then we're also going to file a complaint with the Office of Special Counsel. And as you guys know, each of those offices handle different situations. And so there's a lot of situations that's happened in this case. So we're taking the allegations that IG handles and we're giving those to the IG, and we're taking allegations that happened to the Office of Special Counsel to the Special Counsel. And so that's what we're working on right now.
And you still have an active EEO complaint open as well, correct?
I still have an active EEO complaint open. So that was January. EEO was filed by me on the agency. And then February of 25, I filed the IG. In March, I ended up getting my first piece of adverse disciplinary action. And so now I was getting a notice of proposed suspension for 14 days. And this was literally right after I'd filed my EO IG complaint. It was 10 months after the investigation had completed and the 15-6 report had been finalized.
Quite the coinkydink there, as Ryan says, quite the coinkydink.
Yeah, it just started seeing this pattern. You're right. And so I hired an attorney after I got the adverse action of the notice of proposed 14-day suspension. And we provided response to that, a rather lengthy response to that. We gave not only a written response to that, but we also gave an oral response to that. And the agency ended up sustaining that. So I ended up being suspended without pay for 14 days. And shortly thereafter, and believe it or not, the effective date of the suspension was the anniversary date of the Org Day incident itself. So there's kind of that irony there.
Another coinkydink.
Yeah. And, I always get the notices of these things late on a Friday afternoon from the agency. So that was another thing throughout this process, just, receiving good information on a Friday late in the afternoon. So they sustained the 14-day suspension. And after the suspension was served, this is all while I've been on sick leave, mind you. They've done all of this while I'm on my annual or my sick leave. And then I get this proposed warning of excessive absenteeism. So I've been submitting my sick leave to my supervisor. I submitted my medical documentation, my therapist documentation. I've submitted everything the way that I was supposed to submit it per their requirements. And my boss had been approving my leave, no questions asked. And so I get this warning of excessive absenteeism, and it basically states in there that they're looking at terminating me because I've been out of work.
On the leave that you earned.
Right, on the accrued leave that I've earned to use my leisure.
That's part of your contract that you sign with the U.S. government when you become a federal civilian.
Yep, an employee benefit.
Right.
I was now being told that, I was facing the possibility of termination and removal from federal employment. And so I gave that to my attorney, and shortly thereafter, I received a notice of proposed termination. And just like the notice of proposed suspension, my attorneys prepared and we gave a written and oral argument on the notice of proposed termination. And just recently, I received an interim stay of the notice of proposed termination, meaning that they're ordering me back to work by September 1st. They've paused the decision on the termination, and now they're directing me back to work on September 1st. And they tell me in there that, basically there's no sympathy for being, whatever's gone on. The investigation is now over and I just need to get back to work. I've been told that I need to get back to work because there's people that have been retiring, there's extra work in the office, and that they're having to spread that to do that amongst other people.
Which is their problem to figure out. I think that's one of the bones of contention I had my entire career when our bosses place their responsibilities of personnel management on the subordinates.
Well,
it always drove me nuts.
Yes, and not to mention while I'm facing this crisis and I'm going through these mental health issues and PTSD and just trying to figure out what the heck is even going on. I mean, I've been involved in this for the last 14 months, day in and day out. Mm-hmm. I've pointed things out day in and day out. I've spent a lot of money on fighting for my life, for my family's life, for the violations that they've done to our family. I mean, I told the command that, this intention of this person by making these false allegations was meant to ruin my life. And
well, you make a very important point there, Dan. And here's the position you're in now, because you said you're pointing out their missteps. You're pointing out what they did wrong, and they don't like that. And and I'm not saying you did anything wrong by doing that. That's not only your right, but your duty. Mm-hmm. And you should be bylaw protected, haha. But when you call, or you're perceived to call the institution into question, like you are now, the priority isn't the mission, it isn't the law, it isn't what's written, it's crushing you. Because you are questioning our authority, they say. This is the position that you are thrust into, that so many complainants are thrust into, is like, well, hey, I was wronged or I saw wrong. Now I am doing my legally protected and obligatory steps to seek redress and restitution. And the institution looks at you like, look at this boat rocker. We need to destroy him. And they have, as you stated at the beginning of the show, infinite amount of resources to do that. And so now they go to their standard tactics, techniques, procedures of, we're just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Maybe it's a time card fraud. Maybe it's excessive absenteeism. Maybe you looked at somebody cross-eyed. It doesn't matter, because you are an enemy of the state now, so they say, because you have questioned them. It is the psychological spiral from a group and individual perspective that we see so often. And now the target is you. And it doesn't matter that you've had a spotless record, that you've served this country honorably for a decade and a half, that you were wronged, that you were forfeited your due process, that all that doesn't matter anymore. What matters to them is destroying you. And that's the unfortunate pattern we see all too often.
Yeah, and they do it.
I was doing some reading recently on narcissistic families, children of narcissistic parents. And something else that your story kind of triggered in my mind is one of the things that narcissistic parents or narcissistic families struggle with is when a person decides, you know what, I am not going to be here anymore. I am going to decide to get away from this abuse that I've been suffering. And at that point, the fighting and kicking and all of these narcissistic tendencies of whoever that family member is goes into high gear, because when someone leaves, all of a sudden they have nothing to hide behind. What they are becomes readily apparent to everyone around them. And so when you're saying, well, I'm on leave, I'm using 1,100 hours of my sick leave, your absence alone is painting the picture for everyone around that your command somehow abused you, and because you're gone for mental health reasons and all these things, your command abused you. And so it calls into question, well, why is Dan not here? Oh, well, because look at what his command did, and the command can't deal with that, and so they're going to want to bring you back so that they can, as Ryan was just saying, you can look sideways at someone and then be like, aha, there, see, it wasn't because he had mental health issues because we were abusive. It's because look at how terrible he is as a human being.
That's correct.
Yeah, and it's a total setup. So yeah, so now you're ordered to go back to work on 1 September, and we're helping you. I know us at the foundation and your legal team is helping you kind of work through what you need to for that. So just kind of closing up the episode a little bit. What are your thoughts generally on the system that you're experiencing? And I think you covered it a little bit earlier, where you're in federal service for a decade and a half. You didn't even know these systems existed until all of a sudden they're turned on you. So can you just kind of give some reflections on what you've experienced, what the system is, what your thoughts are on these administrative processes at this point in your career?
Yeah, like you had talked in the pre-show, I didn't know this world existed. I came in through a management trainee program where you're designed to be a leader, and when you're a leader, you're not off worrying about misconduct and the little side things that some of these other employees might indulge in. So I was always working my tail off. I had a young family at that point too, so I only knew there to be one side of the system as I worked through it, and that was to follow and abide the rules, number one, because I worked in financial management my whole entire career. So money's a serious thing within the federal government. So to always safeguard and be a good steward of those funds, to follow rules and regulations. And again, just when I got in charge of leading offices and people and procedures and processes, I had to create those things. And so I created those things to work, not only for the office, but for the organization. And so that's really the only way that I knew the organization to run was fair and the way that it should, based off the rules and the regulations and policies. We've spent a lot of time creating these things. That's what they're meant to do, is to follow them. And so when I got into this situation, I quickly found out that there's this whole other world that exists. And I think, as we've stated, I challenged their processes. I challenged their internal way of handling it. I think that there was a tragic rush to judgment. I called that out immediately, and I continue to call that out. And what they did was they used their administrative process to continue to sidestep due process and accountability. And by doing that, it's a smoke and mirrors. They created this other non-notice of proposed suspension. So now I'm over here fighting this. Now we're getting away from the actual crux of the situation, which was this investigation and due process violation. Now we're making it into this other thing. I've got to now fight and spend all my resources on this notice of proposed suspension. And then, oh, by the way, here quickly comes a warning for absenteeism. So now I'm focused on that. And just as soon as I get focused on that, now I'm receiving a notice of proposed termination. So now I'm working on all these smoking mirror things, and we're getting so far away from what the crux of this problem is. And I can only believe that that's done by the command so they can continue to push it further and further away from what their true issue was. And that was the violation and not following those essential rules that were created and set up, the 15.6. It tells you how to handle investigations. I understand, the AR 600-20, it tells you how to fairly treat things and how to look at things. It tells you what to do when people are lying to you. We sign sworn documents that state in there, if you are knowingly not telling the truth, which I pointed out to the command, this mother knowingly lied about what she alleged happened on a sworn statement to EO. You guys have to see this. Not only did she lie, but down where she signed, it states if you are knowingly providing false information, you can be held accountable by the USMJ.
But if they never interview any of the other witnesses who can contradict her statement, then obviously she's not lying, right?
Right. You get the sergeant that works for the major, or you get the other sergeant who works for the major.
Exactly.
And you don't get their statements right away. You get their statements on the last day. They literally took one of the sergeant's statements on the very last day that the investigation report was signed. So she had literally a month and a half to work with this woman as to what her statement was going to say, and she still got it wrong. There's still glaring contradictions in there.
Right, exactly. And the only way you can create a counter narrative is if you do like what I did when I was rebutting the investigation against me and gathered my own statements. And then do you know what happened to me? I got accused of reprisal because I gathered my own statements. You remember that one, Ryan? That was pretty good.
I was
just like,
accused,
oh my gosh.
I was accused by the IG of hiring attorneys because all I wanted to do with my attorneys was just contradict what the commanding general had signed on the 15-6 investigation.
How dare you?
And I told him, I said, sir,
just...
that makes absolutely no sense. I hired attorneys after 10 months of fighting this on my own. I wasn't contradicting anything. I was telling y'all what you did wrong and what you violated. And it was after that 10-month mark that you did an adverse action on me, was I able to retain counsel. The counsel's not here contradicting you. I've been telling you what's been going on the whole last 10 months. So that's what I got
Plus
told.
there's this, as Ryan says, I'm going to use one of your words, Ryan, there's this kooky thing called the U.S. Constitution that I don't know. I mean, I think we're allowed to have counsel.
Oh, that damn thing again. It's so pesky.
This kooky little thing like government under the laws or something. I forget the exact words, but something like that. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and close us off and give us our final thoughts as we wrap up the show?
Yeah, well, Dan, thanks. Your case is very unique and also very not. It's unique in the amount of courage, grit, tenacity you've displayed. We all know it. You know it well, how much it takes out of you and how much it takes to fight the juggernaut of the government when it squares up against you and decides that it's going to take you down. So hats off to you and well done, sir. It's admirable. The grit you have personified in this. And of course, on the other side, your story is unfortunately not unique at all. We're at 480 some odd cases or whatever it is at the foundation. And so many follow the same pattern, which is you were wronged, you called the institution out, and now they're going to crush you because now saving face has become the priority over anything else, to include care of the people in their stead. You said, I think very succinctly, and I'm probably going to use it as the title, a tragic rush to judgment. That's exactly what happened here. You called them out, they know it, and now they've got egg on their face, and they have a mutually exclusive decision to either fix it and just admit guilt. God forbid they do that. That's like the golden commandment against army and military leadership at large. Or the other way is just make you and the accusation go away. And that's where you're at, but that's why the foundation exists. And with that, we'll say, see you next week. Bye.
Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.